In June 2025, the world was shaken as Iran and Israel erupted into direct war, a conflict that many had feared for decades but hoped would never come to pass. The fragile balance that had kept the two nations apart finally collapsed, unleashing a storm of violence that reverberated far beyond their borders. Decades of uneasy tension, marked by covert operations, proxy battles, and harsh rhetoric, were shattered in an instant. The border, once a line of simmering hostility, became a flashpoint for open warfare. For 12 relentless days, missiles streaked across the night sky and airstrikes thundered through cities. Both nations unleashed their most advanced weaponry, targeting military installations, infrastructure, and tragically civilian neighborhoods. The devastation was swift and merciless, leaving entire communities in ruins and families torn apart. The world watched in horror as city skylines were set ablaze, and the wail of air raid sirens became a grim soundtrack to daily life for millions. Families huddled in shelters, uncertain if they would see the next sunrise, while emergency responders risked their lives to save others amid the chaos. After nearly 2 weeks of unrelenting violence, a US-brokered ceasefire was announced on June 24. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief, but beneath the surface, few believed the peace would last. The ceasefire was fragile, a thin veneer over deep wounds and unresolved grievances. The core issues that had fueled the conflict, nuclear ambitions, the struggle for regional dominance, and decades of mutual distrust, remained as volatile as ever. Political leaders on both sides faced mounting pressure from hardliners and anxious citizens, while protests erupted in cities across the region. In the uneasy calm that followed, the ceasefire felt less like a step toward peace and more like a brief pause in an ongoing storm. Streets once filled with life were now marked by debris and silence, as people ventured out cautiously, haunted by memories of the recent violence. Both militaries used the lull to regroup, rearm, and issue new threats. Political leaders delivered defiant speeches, vowing to defend their nations at any cost. The sense of impending danger lingered in every conversation, every news broadcast, every sleepless night. Across the region, a tense silence settled. Civilians watched the news with anxious eyes, bracing for the possibility that the violence could erupt again at any moment. The world, too, held its breath, uncertain of what the next day would bring. The 12-day war was not an end, but a beginning, a warning of a much larger, more dangerous conflict that now loomed on the horizon, threatening to engulf the entire region in chaos once more. The war between Iran and Israel left a deep and lasting scar on both nations. In the aftermath, the true scale of devastation became painfully clear. Thousands of lives lost or forever changed, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, and vital infrastructure left in ruins. The echoes of explosions and sirens lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the violence that had swept through cities and towns. Iran bore the brunt of the conflict, suffering the heaviest losses. Nearly 1,000 Iranians were killed, among them not only soldiers but also high-ranking commanders and leading scientists whose expertise was irreplaceable. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded, and families across the country mourned loved ones lost to the violence. The pain of loss was felt in every corner of Iranian society, from the largest cities to the smallest villages. Israeli airstrikes targeted and crippled Iran's military infrastructure, leaving bases in ruins, oil fields ablaze, and nuclear sites heavily damaged. The destruction was not just military, it struck at the heart of Iran's national pride and technological ambitions, setting back years of progress in a matter of days. The economic consequences were severe. Factories and refineries ground to a halt. Military vehicles lay abandoned and destroyed, and the nation's ability to recover was hampered by the sheer scale of the damage. Everyday life was disrupted and the future looked uncertain for millions. In Israel, advanced missile defense systems like the Iron Dome sprang into action, intercepting many incoming threats and saving countless lives. These defenses limited the number of casualties and prevented even greater destruction. Yet despite these technological shields, Iranian missile barrages still managed to break through. Dozens of Israelis were killed, thousands more injured, and major cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa were struck, leaving behind scenes of chaos and fear. Emergency responders worked tirelessly to save lives and restore order amid the devastation. For civilians on both sides, daily life ground to a halt. People spent hours in bomb shelters, families huddled together during air raids, and once bustling streets fell eerily silent as the threat of attack loomed overhead. The sudden sense of vulnerability was overwhelming. The constant fear, the sound of explosions, and the uncertainty of survival left deep emotional scars, especially among children and the elderly. The psychological toll was immense, with anxiety and trauma spreading through communities. People comforted one another, but the sense of safety that once existed was shattered. Both nations' populations were left deeply shaken, their collective psyche marked by the horrors they had witnessed and endured. In Iran, the regime now faces the daunting challenge of rebuilding a nation amid economic hardship and growing public anger. Protests erupted as people demanded answers and support, while long lines formed for basic supplies. The government's ability to respond is tested daily. Israel, though less physically damaged, saw its sense of security shattered. The realization that even the most advanced defenses could not guarantee safety left a lasting impact on the national consciousness. The true cost of the war, measured in human suffering, economic loss, and psychological trauma, will haunt both nations for years to come. Hospitals and mental health clinics are overwhelmed, and economists warn of a long road to recovery. The region remains tense and uncertain, its wounds still fresh, as both Iran and Israel grapple with the aftermath and the world watches, hoping for peace but fearing what may come next. The June 24th ceasefire was a pause, not a solution. None of the core disputes, nuclear ambitions, proxy wars, or regional dominance were addressed. Both sides see this as a strategic timeout, not a path to peace. Israel remains determined to prevent a nuclear Iran, while Tehran views its arsenal as essential for survival. Hardliners in Iran push for weaponization, making compromise nearly impossible. The security dilemma deepens. Every move by one side is seen as a threat by the other. With no trust or direct dialogue, the calm is fragile and temporary. Both nations are preparing for the next inevitable clash. Early in the war, 5 Chinese cargo planes vanished from radar as they neared Iran, sparking global intrigue. Their disappearance suggested covert military support, despite China's claims of neutrality. Soon after, Iran's missile capabilities improved dramatically, breaching Israeli defenses. The timing pointed to secret Chinese technology transfers, escalating the conflict's stakes. This incident revealed the war's global dimensions, regional battles entangled with great power rivalry. China's covert support for Iran was a warning. The conflict was no longer just local. The mystery remains unsolved, but its impact is undeniable. The United States found itself at a crossroads, facing a dilemma that would define its role in the Middle East for years to come. How to support its ally Israel without igniting a regional war that could spiral out of control. American leaders weighed every move, knowing that even a single miscalculation could set off a chain reaction across the volatile region. The stakes were higher than ever, and the world watched anxiously as Washington tried to walk a tightrope between deterrence and escalation. As Iran's missile technology advanced rapidly, the threat to both Israel and U.S. interests grew more severe. Washington's careful balancing act became increasingly unsustainable. Intelligence briefings painted a grim picture. Iran's arsenal was not only larger but more accurate and capable of reaching American bases and allies throughout the region. The pressure mounted on U.S. officials to act decisively before the situation slipped beyond their control. On June 22, after weeks of tense deliberations and mounting provocations, the U.S. made a fateful decision. B-2 stealth bombers, the most advanced in the American arsenal, soared across the night sky, targeting Iran's nuclear facilities with pinpoint precision. The world awoke to news of the strikes, an unmistakable signal that the U.S. was willing to use overwhelming force to protect its interests and those of its allies. The shockwaves from the attack reverberated through Tehran. Iranian leaders, caught off guard by the scale and accuracy of the strikes, were forced to the negotiating table. A ceasefire was hastily arranged, but the cost was steep. America had crossed a threshold, becoming a direct combatant in the conflict. The region braced for what might come next. While the intervention halted the immediate bloodshed and prevented further attacks on Israel, it also deepened the animosity between Washington and Tehran. Across Iran, anti-American protests erupted, and the specter of retaliation loomed large. The U.S. found itself locked in a new phase of confrontation, with no easy exit in sight. In a televised address, President Trump issued a stern warning to Iran's leaders, making it clear that any further provocation would be met with even greater force. The message was unmistakable. The U.S. would not hesitate to act again if its interests or allies were threatened. the strikes fundamentally altered the dynamics of the conflict, binding American interests even more tightly to the fate of the region. U.S. military presence surged, with new deployments and heightened alert levels across bases in the Middle East. The world's attention shifted to the possibility of a broader war. Tensions remained sky-high. With American forces now firmly in the crosshairs, the risk of escalation was ever present. Military planners braced for possible reprisals, knowing that the next move could determine the future of the entire region. The war's end brought only a fragile pause, not a true resolution. The shadow of conflict lingered, and the world waited to see if peace would hold, or if the next spark would ignite an even greater fire. The U.S. strikes set back Iran's nuclear program, but only temporarily. Iran responded by expelling international inspectors and ending cooperation with the IAEA. Hardliners called for uranium enrichment to weapons grade, openly pursuing a nuclear deterrent. The regime's defiance has plunged the region into deeper uncertainty. The world is now blind to Iran's nuclear activities, raising fears of a secret dash to the bomb. The strikes may have hardened Iran's resolve, making future diplomacy even harder. The nuclear shadow over the Middle East has grown darker and more dangerous. The Iran-Israel war is a proxy for great power rivalry. The U.S. backs Israel with military aid and direct intervention, aiming to prevent a wider war. China, Iran's economic lifeline, quietly supports Tehran to distract America and secure energy. Russia supplies Iran with weapons and technology, benefiting from higher oil prices and U.S. distraction. Each power pursues its own interests, complicating any hope for peace. The region is a chessboard, with local actors caught in the crossfire of global ambitions. These tangled alliances make a simple resolution impossible. The war's outcome will shape the balance of power far beyond the Middle East. The stakes are global, and the risks are rising. Gulf Arab states watched the war with anxiety, fearing both Iran's power and regional chaos. Publicly neutral, they quietly supported Israeli actions to contain Iran, their longtime rival. The Abraham Accords signaled a new alignment, with secret cooperation between Israel and Gulf monarchies. Yet these states dread being drawn into war. Cities and oil fields are within Iran's reach. Their neutrality is a survival strategy, not indifference. The conflict has left them more vulnerable, forced to balance containment with self-preservation. The region's stability hangs by a thread, every move calculated to avoid disaster. The 12-day war ended, but the conflict's roots remain. The ceasefire is fragile, with both sides preparing for renewed violence. Iran, defiant and isolated, edges closer to nuclear weaponization. Israel stands ready to strike again if threatened. Global powers, America, China, Russia, fuel the crisis with competing agendas. Arab states walk a tightrope, hoping to avoid the fallout. The most likely future covert attacks, proxy wars, and constant tension. The world watches, hoping for peace but bracing for the next explosion.